the local content policy. Well, this time we're joined by Mr. Ernest Nwapa, who is Executive Secretary, Nigeria Content and Development Monitoring Board. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, so many terminologies are being used intermittently, interchangeably, and could confuse one. But give us a background. This Local Content Act of 2010, is it a policy? Does it cover the entire sector, or is it just specific ones for the oil and gas sector? Give us that background, if you will.
Yeah, thank you very much. The Nigerian Content Act, for short, is for the oil and gas industry. That's the one that has been enacted currently. And it covers the entire oil and gas sector and anything connected to it. So when you even talk about power, some aspects of power generation are connected to the oil and gas industry. So we have a linkage there. Some aspects of telecom are connected to the oil and gas industry, and we can cover those areas. But what is more important is that as a philosophy, what we've done in the oil and gas industry in the past few years, now permeating into the overall economy of Nigeria. Because as you know, this is the foundation of the Nigerian economy, the oil and gas industry. But if we look back a little bit and see why we even got here, where it became necessary to make a law for Nigerian content development, you realize that for 50 years, when oil prospecting started or actual production started, we have been doing things in such a way that we've not developed capacity within the country. We've been exporting jobs, we've been exporting knowledge, opportunities for investment. So the impact has been that over the years, we don't have executive capacity in Nigeria. I listened to your past speaker, where he was, your past speaker was talking about telecom.
Yeah.
That's spot on. What they're talking about telecom today was prevalent in the oil and gas industry up to a few years ago.
Have you got any complaint about the telecom sector, for instance?
No, I wouldn't delve into the telecom sector. But what I'm just saying is that philosophy of doing things outside the country was in the Nigerian oil and gas industry. But the impact on telecom cannot be as big as the impact in the oil and gas industry, because here, this is where Nigeria gets 90% of its revenue and 80-something% of its foreign currency or foreign yes. So when you look at that, you can't but take the oil and gas sector very seriously with local content. We lost over 2 million jobs in 30 years. Anytime you hear that Nigeria has bought an FPSO or built an FPSO in Korea, that's up to 100,000 jobs. We've done about 7 FPSOs in the last 20 years, right? So anytime you do that, you take away opportunities where young people can learn.
Okay. Well, what is the implementation strategy of this Local Content Act?
The whole thrust of the act is to get Nigerians to participate in the industry, to get Nigerian goods and services to be utilized in the industry, to get the oil producing communities where these things are being brought out of to feel that they're part of this whole exercise, to participate in the economic activity.
Shouldn't they be in stages? Because it can't be wholesale.
No, it's not wholesale.
Mindful of our challenges.
We've started this thing from 2005. First of all, NNPC set up the structured division within NNPC to deal with it as a policy. It is that policy, the implementation of that policy demonstrated how we could see the progress. And now it is a law. A fresh board was set up, the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board. That board has powers and the authority to enforce the implementation. It's no longer a policy where you negotiate. And we've taken it step by step. It's been a gradual build-up. Right now, it's mandatory. A lot of things in the law are mandatory. And because we had a stepwise approach to it, you can see everything coming together. And that's why we are making some of the progress you're seeing on a daily basis.
How difficult is monitoring with compliance level?
Well, when you talk about monitoring and compliance, you again have to understand that the law gave mandates. And some of the things the law has asked us to push for are things we didn't have capacity for, or at least the capacity wasn't organized. As we speak now, we've been able to use a collaborative approach, because it's one thing to make a law, but what is actually more important is getting people, showing people the way to get this act in place. Now, the approach we've adopted is to engage the IOCs. The IOCs are the international oil companies. They hold 85 to 90% of the control of the oil and gas industry, both in terms of the assets and in terms of the technology. So they are most times they're operators in the joint ventures with NNPC. So because of that, their say is important. We can take NNPC's position for granted that NNPC, being a national oil company, must support what we are doing. But the IOCs, you have to actually engage them, and that's one of the first things we did. By doing that, we've changed the entire philosophy of the industry to the extent that now, rather than the situation we used to have before where things used to be pushed away, the managing directors of the IOCs today, if you bring up a proposal to them, be it a budget or at the strategy session, they ask you, just as they ask about safety and quality, they ask you, have you considered the Nigerian content angle?
Okay.
So it's that important.
You're picking up from the question Sola asked, because it's one thing to insist that companies, if a local company can do this job, give it to them. Do you monitor these companies from start of each project to finish?
Precisely. I'll tell you, this is a very structured implementation strategy, and it's like that because we've taken time. We've engaged all sectors of the stakeholders. Before you get a license or you renew a license, there's a Nigerian content plan that every operator must submit. That Nigerian content plan itemizes what he will do about research and development, about technology transfer, about employment, about training, about manufacturing, about fabrication, engineering. All those things are lined up. Then we approve it. When we approve it, you go into your adverts and your tender process. During the tender process, what we do is to monitor. Have you included the fact that you must do what you said in your plan? And then it goes through to contract award. Before the contract is awarded, the board must issue a Nigerian content compliance certificate. So you've started monitoring from the design stage. When the contract is then awarded, we have a monitoring directorate that goes in on a monthly basis to check your compliance level on the actual versus planned. You know, when you have an item, you say, we plan to do 35% in Nigeria.
And what you actually did.
And what we actually did on a monthly basis. So we track that. And all this is contained, is now put on an electronic platform that we call the Joint Qualification System. You can't cover the Nigerian oil and gas industry by running as a policeman, going to check your papers. No, it is a continuous process. Okay. So at the end of the day, what we come out with is a consolidated assessment of what we're doing.
Okay, in terms of infrastructure, I know that one of the major complaints is that doing certain things here is more expensive than if you actually brought in the technology from outside. How have you been able to address that, as one of the fears of especially the international oil companies?
Yeah, infrastructure doesn't create itself. And people don't really put facilities on ground until they see a demand for it. So what the law and what our activities have put in place is to force demand within Nigeria. There's a requirement that you must do stuff within Nigeria. You cannot import anything that can be manufactured in Nigeria. That alone is a driver for investment. Within the past 2 years, we've seen investments of over $2 billion to upgrade existing facilities. Because if you look at Dorman Long, if you look at Niger Dock, look at Saipem, Avion in Port Harcourt, Globestar in Warri, these companies had been here. They had facilities, they had infrastructure. But if you don't give them work, they sack their workers, their facilities become dumping grounds, and nobody maintains it. This law alone, by putting this law up and making sure that it's implemented seriously, investments are flowing into this. I mean, a few weeks ago, the president went to Niger Dock to commission one of the platforms. That kind of thing hadn't been done in Nigeria before. From design to completion. And it's not only Niger Dock. Everywhere you go, things like that are happening. Once people see that the government is serious, that the Nigerians are capable, and it's a fight. But today, we've come to a point where it's clear. Okay. It's clear to the whole world that can be done, and that's moving investments in.
Yeah, but speaking of which, I mean, if I could also pick up from that, in terms of infrastructure here, we do know that we've got some challenge here.
Yes.
For instance, if you look at steel pipe mills,
yes.
How many of them do we have in Nigeria? Apart from Abuja, Ajaokota is not functioning optimal capacity. What are we doing about it?
Excuse me.
Again, all this, we talk to dozens of investors every week. When they come, the question they ask is, if we invest $50 million, most of these plants need a minimum of $50 to $150 million to build. If we invest in these things, are you as a government, are you as a board going to support and ensure that people don't import these same things we're making here on a flimsy excuse? And we say, yes. They talk about power, they talk about security, but the key question for them is business. Are you going to put business in this plant? If you're going to do it, we're going to put money. So SCC is a plant that has been here for years. They were set up to do water pipes. We said that if you can do water pipes, upgrade to oil and gas pipes, and they did that. Therefore, we have been fighting to make sure that pipes are put in there. It's going to cost more at the beginning. But if you don't put work in that existing facility, nobody's going to put a new one. And if you complain about the cost will be high because it's just starting. If there are 3 more pipe mills in Nigeria, then you have competition and the prices will come down. And the more they see that they have work for 5 years, the prices will come down.
Okay.
So that's our commitment. Our commitment is that every investor that puts work here, that law supports that we must get work in their plants. Like was said earlier in your program, the focal point of government is employment. Each of these mills will employ 500 to 1,000 direct workers because they work in shifts. Now, it's going to cost more money to buy their products, but in essence, the value it adds to the country's economy is much more than those dollars. Because compare a productive worker on a shop floor and then a worker that is just employed because government needs to employ more people. There's a social employment and there's productive employment.
Add this to it, so pardon me, because there are 2 aspects to it. Because one would think that ordinarily, companies don't want to spend more when they can spend less.
Yes.
In terms of companies that import some of this equipment, they rather do business here if it's cheaper. But some of them find out that it's cheaper to import some of these facilities than just getting them here.
Yes, that's why it's a national program. You know, this program would not have recorded this success if it was just a program run at the level of the board. Government has taken a view to the point that we've got to create a real sector employment. And government at the highest level is making sure that whatever the problem is will be addressed. There is a fund to support these investments. There is a complete alignment at the highest level of government that we have to have these facilities. If we don't have these facilities, the reality is it's not just about capital flight, which is a whole lot, about 380 billion.
But that's where the challenge is. How do you ensure that the fund is judiciously used for what it is meant for?
Yes, I'll come to tell you how it's going to be used. It's a structured fund, right? But the key thing is that just on its own, the industry can generate the market to make these things business cases. It's not just that we're forcing people to do these things. By putting work in these facilities, the long-term costs drop. And companies don't plan for 1 year. Companies plan for 5 years. So that's a given. But the point I was trying to make is that the irreversibility of this policy is guaranteeing the investments and people see the benefits, as a country, we have to have places where our students, for instance, we talk about the problems with human capital and that Nigerian universities produce students who can't work. Wow. That is, it's a very major issue. But one of the greatest challenges we have is not really what they read in school, but the fact that they don't have a place to actually do practicals. Like you remember industrial attachment. People do industrial attachment in ministries. People do industrial attachment in banks. Wow. Engineers do industrial attachment in some kind of places where you never have any engineering activity. If you don't have places like we used to have in the 70s, where an engineer will go and see how a spanner is used, how you produce a gear from plain steel, how you weld something like a plate to become a pipe. He can't be a real engineer. And how can you do that if most of the work is being done in Korea and China and India? These are costs that you cannot put a dollar sign behind.
Are you working with the schools? Because we know that they used to be funded at some point in time to go for these industrial attachments.
Yes.
Are you going to work with the schools about that?
Yeah, we're working with NUC now. We're going to start engaging NUC. But beyond NUC, we have a program ourselves, which is the Human Capital Development Program, that makes sure that young graduates, any contract that is awarded in this country, has a 10% provision for training. And this is not a funding issue. It goes beyond funding. You must provide
provision for training.
For training. If you get a contract today to do a fabrication job, whether it's in Niger or whether it's in Avion or Dorman Long, you must create 10%. The 10% is not creating money. It's creating opportunity. Because you will train that student or that young graduate for 6 weeks to 3 months, and then you will attach him to the project. You will attach him to the project for 2 years. But most of them that get into that facility don't come out.
You know,
it's now a channel, a pipeline to getting work.
It's very interesting that should I say, lucky Nigerian companies in the oil and gas sector. But if you look at the complaint of the very first guest,
yeah,
other sectors seem to look at the 1970s indigenization policy to be able to get any meaning or anything at all enforcing some form of Nigerian content in their own industries. Are we looking at, expanding our reach in terms of Nigerian content in other industries as well?
Yeah. I think that's why a lot depends on how we succeed. Because it is becoming clear to everybody that this is the way to go. I've had discussions with some ministers in some of these areas. I'll look at people in power and telecom. They don't need to have a law to start with. The oil and gas didn't take a law to start. The NNPC, because you have the authority, NNPC as an organization gave directives to the industry. Directive number 1, you must do this. Number 2, number 3. It started with 16 directives and got up to 23 directives. And the industry was bound to comply. The only thing is that failure to comply did not have any legal consequences. But as the GMD of NNPC, you had authority to direct your partners to do certain things within a certain framework. So in the same way, other sectors, a ministerial directive is enough to start with. And then people begin to understand the pros and cons of the implementation, so that if a law is necessary, you enact a law. The laws are not the keys to these things. It's actually the implementation.
Okay. Well, can we also say, in clear, concrete terms, what the gains have been? How many more people have been employed as a result of this? How much money has come into the country or stayed in the country as a result of this?
Yes, I'll answer that question as directly as I can. Marine sector, marine vessels. In the past, Nigeria was a country, called itself a maritime nation. In the services and operations, no ownership of marine vessels. $3.8 billion spent annually in the oil and gas industry alone. Only 500 million retained in Nigeria. Why? Because people were taking agency fees. Today, because of the directives of the Honorable Minister of Petroleum Resources, at the beginning, we just had a strategy session. These are the areas you must focus on. Ownership of marine vessels, employment of 30,000 direct employees, the fabrication yards, pipe mills. There are 7 points. Banks and insurance companies. You must make sure that we use banks and insurance companies. Once the minister's directive came like that, so out of a law that had about 102 provisions, so okay, go ahead and push those provisions, but focus on these 7, and I'm behind you. So that's a ministerial directive. When you do that, and the industry sees a letter from the board, I'm authorized by the law to give you this directive, go ahead and do it. The minister is behind me. This law has had people from foreign missions going to Nigerian government officials to say, can't we change this, can't we change this? But from the president down to the minister to us, everybody's aligned. This must be implemented. So we now have about $1.8 billion being retained because we've insisted that rather than going to lease marine vessels from owners abroad, if you lease a marine vessel for $100 and you paid $100,000 a day, for instance, you only take $5,000. The rest is going back to the original owner. If you own it, you get that much. You can pay back the loan you've taken to, but most of those loans go back into the Nigerian economy. That's a major area. Fabrication yards. The tonnage of fabrication that is being done in Nigeria now has grown by 250%. Verifiable.
250%.
The growth. Because in the past, you used to fabricate less than 5,000 tons a year. One project alone is fabricating 7,500 in Nigeria. There was some project of Total. Chevron is doing lots in Nigeria. If you look at Shell, every week you hear that Shell is supporting the establishment of this facility in Nigeria. And it's all part of the growth plan. What does that do eventually? It begins to create employment in numbers that we are tracking directly. From the board directly, we have a tracking of about 2,300 trained and employed in the past 3 years. But there are areas we are not seeing. Because you are employing more people, their spending power is higher. People supporting these facilities that we are insisting that they get work are growing their employees.
Okay.
So it's a multiplier effect that we are working on the model to actually tally.